So, okay, you guys can all see the presentation, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. Okay, we'll get started then. So, we are women in information and computer science. My name is Sunyu Chen.
And I'm Bianca Lara.
And we are the co-presidents of WIX. And our purpose is to support underrepresented genders in technology. We hope to do this by creating a sense of community, helping each other explore topics in computing, as well as developing professional skills together. And so in order to kick off the workshop, we would like to get to know a little bit about the attendees. So I'll just go off of what we have in Zoom right now. And if you would not mind, please say your name, and then like maybe if you have any previous experience with Python or in any other programming language too, that'd be great. Ashwini.
Hi. So my
Hi.
name is Ashwini Rajshekhar. I basically work at the University of Arizona. I do Java and PHP and other website technologies. I've never worked on Python, so I was curious to know more. So
Nice.
that's why I'm attending it.
Great. Ellie.
Hi, so I'm Ellie, and I have a little bit of experience with Python. I took a Python class my sophomore year of high school, and right now I'm learning Java, but I think so far I definitely prefer Python, so I'd like to learn a little bit more about it.
Nice. Liliana.
Hi. Yes, I'm like Ollie, that I have a previous brief experience on Python and also on R, but I like better Python. So I'm happy to hear and learn from you.
Nice. Great. That's cool. Okay. So just in case, beforehand, if you don't already, please download Python, and then also download an IDE or whatever IDE that you're comfortable with. We suggest Atom for this one just because it's easy to download and easy to start with if you don't already have one, but it doesn't really matter. Okay.
Okay, so before we actually go over like the Python syntax and data structures, I wanted to talk a little bit about like why Python is different from other languages. So I think the general design of Python is just to be more human readable compared to these other programming languages. So if you like look at these bullet point examples, you'll see that Python is organized by like white space, while many other programming languages are organized by like curly brackets and semicolons. That way your code has to have inherent structure. You can optionally you can have optional object orientation in Python, so you can organize things via objects or not, if that is more readable for your program. Python is also dynamically typed, which can be a little confusing if you don't know the types of your variables. But that way you don't have to declare types beforehand, and that also increases like the readability. And comments are using the pound sign versus the triple quotes. I don't really know why that would be, why that particular design choice was made compared to the double slash and the slash asterisks. And the most noticeable difference, I think, are the logical operators, which use and or not, versus the somewhat more confusing double and double pipes and exclamation point.
And so now we'll be getting into Python syntax and data structures. And if any of you guys ever have any questions throughout the entire workshop, don't be afraid to unmute and speak up if you're comfortable with that. But yeah, we can definitely go over things again if need be. So the first thing that we'll be going over are Python lists. Python lists in general are immutable types, and the contents, which means the contents can be changed at any time throughout the lifetime of the program. And they're usually denoted with two or with brackets, opening and closing square brackets, and they can hold any and multiple types of data types, so like numbers, strings, characters, etc. And they are dynamically allocated because it's the programming language is dynamically typed. But indexing works very similarly to just arrays in general in other languages. And so when you're declaring or initializing a Python list, you can initialize it with an empty square bracket, so nothing inside of it, or you can manually add whatever values you want into the list as well. As for slicing, you can do it just by using the square brackets, and so the bounds will be inclusive and then exclusive for the beginning and the end. And so, for example, you can see that for the 1 to 5, you see the list starting from index 1 and then going all the way up to the letter A or character A. And then for like the second part where you can just have the beginning bound, and then it'll print out the rest of the list. And then it's kind of like the opposite if you specify an ending bound. For replacing elements in the list, because the Python list is mutable, you can change the contents anywhere in the list. So like, for example, we have at index 7, we're going to replace it with the string new. And so you can see that the letter A was replaced with, or I must have, I must have made a new list, but it was replaced with the value new. Other common list methods include .append, so you would just add an element at the very end of the list. Inserting is kind of like inserting at a specific index and then what item you want to insert. Popping it will pop off the last item in the list. Or you can also specify what item you want to pop off. And then for removing, you're basically removing the item, but if you don't know what index it's at, then you can just specify, oh, I want to remove this item, and it'll do it for you. .listing or .sort will sort the list for you, and then you can also get the length of the list by just doing len and then typing in the name of the list.
All right, so our next data structure is dictionaries. If you're familiar with Java or maybe C, you would notice that it has a lot of similarities to hashs and I think objects or structs in C. Just like hash maps in Java, the keys must be immutable types, while the values can be immutable or mutable. And in this example, we have a couple of different dictionaries where you can see that you can declare a dictionary via the empty curly brackets. You can declare it with values in it, or you could use the object initializer, which is just dict with parentheses. And to actually like add things to a dictionary in Python, you don't actually have to call that many different types of methods on it. Rather you just have to use the square brackets with the value with the key value pair specified as shown like on the 4th line. And a couple of useful methods for getting like the items in your dictionary would be like .keys, .items, and to remove something you would use something like .pop, which is I think pretty much the same thing as with lists.
So then the next data structure we'll go into are Python sets. These are basically unordered collections of unique elements, and all elements in the set have to be immutable, but the items in the set can be like different types again, just like lists. And then you can also use like common mathematical set operations on them, such as like union, intersection, and difference. And so then for creating a set, you can use the like set method or set function and make sure that whatever you put inside of it could actually be like iterable, meaning that it can be like looped through. So like for the first example, we have like a set and then you pass in a list of 471 A and B. And then when you pass it into the set function, it turns it into a set. And then for the second way of declaring or initializing a Python set, you can just use curly braces. But the difference is when you use it for creating a set, it can't be empty. So if you like try to create a set just with empty curly braces, it will think that it's actually a dictionary. So don't do that if you want to create a set at least. So then for some examples, you can do like dot add, and then new will be added to the set. You could pop, and then it will remove like an arbitrary element from the set since the set has no order to it. So it's just going to pop off an element from the set. And then for like using union, you just kind of dot association with the first set, and then you pass in whatever set you want to union with it. And that's the same idea for like intersection and difference. Other common set methods would be like remove. So you remove the element that you want to remove from the set, and discard also works as well. For some reason, I can't think of the reason why it's remove and discard, but and then you can also clear out a whole entire set by just doing dot clear. Yep.
All right. And for some of the so some of the last slides will be covering the different types of iterative loops and general code blocks that you can write in Python. So if you're familiar with another programming language, you'll recall that like to write a function or a for loop or any sort of code block, you need curly brackets to designate what's in that code block. However, with Python, this syntax has changed to use a colon, and everything that is in the code block has to be indented afterwards. So this for loop is an example of that code structure. It ranges from 0 to 9, and it will print every value of I, which is 0 to 9. And if we go to the next slide, we have an example, just a brief example of that same loop, but in the while loop format. The only difference really being that you have to declare the n variable beforehand, and then make sure that you're actually incrementing it in the while loop. And to break out of a while loop, you use the same like operations that you would in like Java or C with like break and continue.
So another thing that would be useful for our activity is user input. This allows users to like interact with the program you've coded. And so you take in input from a user, and then input will evaluate the expression. So the syntax is just simply input, and then you can put like a prompt inside of it, such as like enter a number. And then when it gets to the input statement in the program will like stop until something has been entered by the user. And then for the expression that you input, it will convert everything to a string. And this means that if you're like entering like an integer or something, you might have to typecast it if you still want it in an integer format. Otherwise, it will think that it's a string, and then when you like try to use it, it'll be all confused depending on what you're using the input for.
All right, and the last type of syntax that we have in these review slides are functions. So you can declare functions using the def article, and similar to while loops and for loops, you have to use the colon followed by indentation to specify what's actually in the function. And of course, like other programming languages, functions can take parameters or arguments, and which can be passed into the function when you're actually calling it.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the activity?
Nope, I'm good.
Cool. Glad you guys got that. Okay, so now that you've reviewed or learned some new things, we'll be getting into the activity that we have for today. We're just going to create like a simple word game, kind of similar to, or I guess it is Hangman, but the idea is you enter a phrase or a word, and then another person has like a limited number of guesses to guess the entire phrase of the word. And so we'll be using like user input, lists and stuff like that, loops, all of that in order to create like a cute little game. So if you don't already, please open up your IDE and create like a new Python file. And it can just be empty because the way Python works is it just reads through the whole program, I guess, when it compiles. So you don't like need anything special like imports or anything unless you're going to import like another Python library. Yeah, okay. Another thing also is if you, I guess depending on what operating system you're using, but if you have Windows, you should have PowerShell, and so that will help you with running the program, I guess, just to see if it compiles and stuff like that. If you don't have, I think you can also do the same thing on Mac, just not with Windows Shell or PowerShell. You'd use the terminal, but anyways. Okay, so for the first part of the program, we're going to start off with main. And usually the reason why we start off with main is because it will have like the general structure of the entire program. And then we'll use like, we'll create other functions in order to do other parts of the whole game. So like checking to make sure if the letter that was entered is correct, or keeping track of like what the current game state is and stuff like that. And then the reason why we have to call main at the end is because when it reads the program, it's going to see that some of the code is going to be in a function, and it won't execute it yet until it finds like a call to main. So that's why we put main at the very bottom. Okay. So for keeping track of the state of the game, we'll need to declare some variables. So like the number of guesses, we said it would be 6. Yeah, 6. And then a good thing to keep track of is like previous guesses to see if someone is trying to guess the same letter that they've already guessed before. And so then we can create like a list, an empty list. Another thing will be keeping track of the correct guesses. So if they guessed a letter correctly, And then another thing is, it'll make more sense later on, but when you're adding letters to the correct guesses, sometimes a letter or phrase will have multiple of the same letter, right? So you want to keep track of how many letters you actually guessed correctly, rather than just putting it in the correct guesses list. Yeah. Okay. So the first part of the game, right, is asking for input. Does anyone want to say or like spell out how they would ask for input? Oh, that's okay. So usually we'll store the input into a variable. So like a secret word or something like that. And then you'll call input. And then to make it easier on the user who's going to be running this program, it's always good to input a prompt. Like enter a word. And then for setting up the game, what we'll do is fill in the correct guesses with underscores. And so the reason why we fill them with underscores is so then it's easier to print out the list later on. So like for, okay, for I don't know, C in range length of secret word. And so then when we're indexing into correct guesses, we'll just equal that to an underscore. And then also if they decide to put like an entire phrase instead of just a word, so then we want to make sure to not put like, we want to make sure that we put spaces instead of like underscores and stuff like that. And so we'll add like an if statement. Okay. If the secret word at C is equal to like a space, then correct guesses C will equal space instead of an underscore. Else we will just put it with an underscore. Okay, I think that's it for setting up the game. My Zoom is glitching out. Okay. Okay, there we go. Cool. Oh, also a good habit to have in general, regardless of what programming language, is always to put comments. So like for this part, we're setting up word game, stuff like that. So then if you go back to your code and you're like, oh, what did I do back then? Or why did I do something? Then there's a comment there to tell you what you were thinking about at that time. Okay, now that we have that, we will start off with a while loop. So the reason why we have a while loop is so then we can continually run the game, even if they're like, basically you want to keep running the game until they run out of guesses, right? So while number of guesses is greater than 0. And then throughout the game, you'll be like subtracting from number of guesses if they guess a letter incorrectly. So the first thing that we want to do is get input with the letter that they want to input. So like guess the letter. Okay. And then what else? One thing is for programs with like a lot of input, you usually want to do like some error checking just to make sure that whatever they input is actually valid, so then it doesn't break your code later on, basically. So if letter is less than like the character A, or the letter is greater than the characters Z, then we want to print like an error message to let the user know that, hey, that was not a valid letter. Please input something else. So.
Is this kind of the same as using the is numeric or is alpha, sorry, the is alpha function?
I think it's exactly the same.
Okay.
Okay. Wait, that's in Java, right?
No, I
No?
think Python has one too.
Oh. Oh well. Sorry. I'm like switching back and forth between what programs or what languages I'm programming in all the time, so. Okay. Does anyone else know what else we should do next now that we verified that the user has input a letter?
Would we check if the letter is correct?
Right. So how do we check to see if a letter is in the secret word, I guess? Does anyone have any guesses?
Would you use another for loop to check if the letter that they guess is in the list?
Yeah. Yes. So we can do like check if the letter is correct for C in range of the secret word. If the letter is equal to the secret word in C, then we should, or what should we do? Does anyone know?
Would you add the letter to correct guesses?
Yeah, exactly. So then one thing is because correct guesses is a list, right? And you don't want to necessarily just like add it to the list, right? You want to put it in the correct index. And so you would just do like correct guesses at C equals letter. And then because it's in a for loop, right? Every time we see the same letter over again, it will just place it into the list and then we'll be good. And then another thing that, I don't know why it keeps doing that. Another thing that we have to make sure is update the number of correct letters as well. So then later on, it'll be easier to check, oh, you've completed the whole word or the whole phrase. So non-correct letters equals 1. There we go. Okay, so now that we have that, we should print out a message to let the user know that, hey, you guessed the correct letter. So after the for loop, we should check to make sure that we could give them like a little message like, hey, something like that. Okay. But what happens if a letter that they input doesn't exist in the word? Is there something that maybe we could do beforehand to say like, hey, the letter that you inputted is incorrect? Input another letter? Or like, how should we do that? Does anyone have a guess?
Can you
Could you say
provide
that
else?
again?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, sorry. I was just gonna say, like, could you add an else statement in the for loop?
Oh, yeah. Or in the for loop. Well, the thing is, if we add, okay, so if we do like, just for like example, right? Elif letter doesn't equal the secret word at C. If we do it this way, it's gonna, and then we put like a print, like oh, wrong letter. That means every time we hit a letter that doesn't match the letter in the secret word, it's gonna print out wrong letter every time.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So does someone have another suggestion? If not, one thing that I thought about was, what's the point of checking the word if the letter doesn't exist in the word in the first place, right? So the cool thing, because of Python being a more like human readable language, is that we can use keywords such as like in. So if letter in like secret word or something like that. Oops. Then we could check it, you know? So then we could like indent this whole thing, and then this whole for loop and all this will only occur if the letter is actually in the secret word. And then else, we can decrement the number of guesses because they guessed it incorrectly, right? So 1 guesses minus 1. And then we should probably print out like another message. What else? I think that's pretty much it for that part. Does anyone have any questions so far, by the way? Or like why we did it a specific way, or like do you have a suggestion on how we could change it instead?
I do have a question. So continue in line 23, I think. Is that in the if loop? Because I typed mine and it's has a red line under it. I'm not really sure why.
So with Python, right, you have to make sure you indent things correctly because it doesn't use curly braces to denote what is inside a function and stuff like that. And so continue would be inside of the if statement, basically.
Okay, cool. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. Okay, so that makes sure we continue. And then if the letter is in the secret word, then hey, you guessed the correct a letter correctly, and then we continue after that. Otherwise, you guessed the wrong letter, we decrement the number of guesses, and then we move on. So let's say, okay, here. A good thing to do would also be, as you're like writing out your program, it's also good to like test it and stuff like that. So like, that's weird. Oh, because also save. Make sure you save your work. That's why. Okay. So let's enter a word or a phrase such as like hello or something like that. So then as you're like continually testing and checking to make sure that your program will compile, this will also help to make sure that you're writing good syntax and stuff like that. So for this one in line 39, inside of main, it's saying that we can't assign it to, list assignment index out of range. For C.
You have to append them to the correct guesses list.
That's right. Okay. So now you know. So if a list is uninitialized, you can't just randomly index into it and expect it to be stored at a specific spot. So instead of indexing, we will do append. Okay. I think that's good now. Save. Hello. Okay, cool. Now we can guess a letter. So we could check like different inputs. So what happens if we like type in the number 2? That's not a letter. So then please input a letter. What happens if we type in the wrong letter? So like a W. You guessed the wrong letter. Please try again. Let's see. Type in H. You guessed a letter correctly. And then, yay. So at least that's working, right? Does anyone know what would be a good thing to add in order to make sure, basically to let the user know how well they're doing with guessing the word? So one thing that I thought of while doing this was like, oh, what if they don't know how many wrong letters that they've guessed so far, or like the number of guesses they have after guessing incorrectly, so then they know not to guess incorrectly. No. You could print like the number of guesses. So like you have none guesses left, basically. Okay, so let's test that out. Hello, guess a letter. H, cool, we guessed a letter correctly. What happens if we guess like W? You guessed a wrong letter. Please try again, and now you have 5 guesses left. I guess I could put the word guesses. Okay. Let's try that again. So hello, type in a W. You have 5 guesses left. Cool. That's like a good chunk of the game already. Let's see. So another good thing. Oh, right. So how do you know that the game has finished, right? How do you know that the game, or you've guessed the whole word or phrase correctly? Does anyone want to suggest something? So obviously, like, when they've guessed all of the letters in the word correctly, you want to congratulate them to make sure that they know that the game is ended and they don't need to guess anymore. So one thing that we could check is the number of correct letters. So like, see, when you guess a letter correctly, right? Let's say you've put in like ELLO and then you guessed H, right? You want to print out, hey, you guessed the letter correctly, but then you also want to let the user know that they've guessed the last letter in the phrase. So you do like another check, if number of correct letters is equal to the length of the secret word. Print yes the whole. And then since we are inside of a while loop, in order to break out of it, what should we do? Does anyone want to guess?
Could it be the break keyword?
Right, so be break. Oh, not a semicolon. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. You guessed the whole word correctly. Oh, even though you've guessed the whole word, you want to see the whole word, right? So you could print secret word, and then you break, and then the game ends. So what happens if the number of guesses, like they run out of guesses, right? It'll break out of the while loop, and then what should we do if they run out of guesses to guess the word correctly?
Maybe just print like no more guesses left, and then like what the correct word was, maybe.
Mm-hmm. So, what is it? So like, another thing to also make sure of is just because you break out of the while loop, it could be multiple types of scenarios, right? So we broke out of the while loop because they guessed the whole phrase correctly, or we broke out of the while loop because it's 0 or less than 0. So something that we have to check is making sure that they actually had, they still had guesses, right, before they broke out of the while loop, or they don't have any more guesses. So if the number of guesses equals 0, print you didn't guess the word phrase correctly. And then, print out the secret word so then they know what it is. And yeah. Okay, let's test that out, make sure it works. Hello. So if we guess like, oh, you guessed the letter correctly. Okay. If we guess like T, you guessed the wrong letter. Please try again. And so if we guess every single letter in the word correctly, you guessed the letter correctly, you guessed the whole phrase or word correctly, and then yay. Let's see. then print out the hello, and that's it. Now, what happens? Oops. Now, what happens if we don't, or if we run out of guesses, right? So like T, I don't know, just putting in random letters at this point. So you guessed the wrong letter. Please try again. You have 0 guesses left. You didn't guess the word or phrase correctly, and then you print out the phrase. So yeah. Another thing that we can add is what happens if the person wants to know how they're doing throughout the game, right? And so like maybe we can give them a way to do it. So like what happens if we check to see if like it's a question mark, right? So if letter is equal to a question mark, then let's see. They want to know how many, like, we can add, like, oh, maybe something like you have guesses left. What else?
Could we show what guesses they've made already?
Yeah. So, what is something that we could print out to show them that what guesses they have so far?
Could you print out the list correct guesses?
Yeah, because we filled it with underscores and then with the letter, right? So we could do print correct guesses, and then I think that would be it, right? Print correct guesses. You have this number of guesses left.
If you wanted it to be in like a non-list format, you could use like .join, right? To join the elements into a single string.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so when you print out a list, if you remember from before, it'll like literally print out like a square bracket and then some letter like that, right? And so since we don't want it to look like that, right, we could do, you have none guesses so far. I think it's just .join, right? Like that. Okay. Let's try that out. So we have hello, guess a letter, I don't know, like H. Let's say we put in a question mark, right? And it says you have 6 guesses left. This is what you corrected so far. Bianca, do you remember how to use join?
It's string.join, and then in the parameters are list.
Oh.
Yeah.
If I do something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Cool. The nice thing about Python is that there's a lot of different like shortcuts, such as like .join or like you don't have to like do == stuff like that.
And a majority of Python's libraries are already built in. You just have to like Google search pretty much just what function you think might exist to see if it exists, and most of the time it does.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about Python. Because beforehand I was like individually like printing out each letter and making sure that they print out together, but I forgot that .join exists. So glad you brought that up, Bianca. Okay, so hello, you. Okay, so what about like H? Oh, it's correct. Now I want to know what I've guessed so far. So this is what you've guessed so far, and then it prints out your guesses. And so we can see that, oh, for some reason it's printing out an extra print statement. And so after the if statement, right, we didn't say to stop continuing in the while loop, right? So what is something that we can add so then we don't execute the rest of the while loop? Does anyone want to guess? It's a keyword that we've already used.
Is it break?
Right. So with break, we'll go through the loop, player guess a letter, and then if they put in a question mark, it'll
I
print
think it
out.
would be continue, right?
Is it? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, because the key difference between continue and break, continue will just go all the way back to the top, but break just completely stop the while loop.
Right. I don't know what happened to me. So when you continue, it instead of executing everything else, it'll just loop back up to the top and it'll say, hey, player, guess a letter. And then we continue the while loop. But if we break, right, we're gonna completely break out of the while loop and then it'll just go straight to whatever is after the while loop. So to test that out, here we go. Enter word or phrase like hello. Okay, what happened? Guessed the wrong letter. Yeah, 5 guesses left. Let me input another letter. Okay, now I want to know what the state of the game is so far. So you have 5 guesses left. This is what you've guessed correctly so far. Sometimes you don't see the grammar mistakes until you actually play with the code or until you start testing it, but it's what you've guessed correctly so far. Okay. Guess a letter. I don't know. You guessed a letter correctly, but what if they've already guessed it, right? So we have the letter E, but I've already guessed the letter E. Why would I want to? I guess it'd be good to know that, hey, you've already guessed the letter, right? So something that we have to do, or does anyone have any suggestions on how we can keep track of previous guesses?
We add it to the list named previous guesses.
Right. So it doesn't matter whether you've guessed the letter correctly or not. It would be a good idea to just add the letter to previous guesses in general. So, oops. Per guesses, append the letter, right? And so then what should we do about previous guesses to make sure that the letter that we're guessing is not already in it? Or like if it is, what should we do? I'm like trying to phrase it without like giving away too much.
Should we use an if loop? Like if the letter is in previous guesses, then I don't know, ask the question again or let them know that they've already guessed the letter.
Right, exactly. So if letter in prev guesses print like already guessed that letter, please try again, and then you just continue. Okay, let's test that out. Guess letter H, E, O, Z. What if I guess E again? Oh, you've already guessed that letter. Please try again. So cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions, or if they thought of something to add to the game, we could probably do that too. If you're not, yeah.
Yeah, you can ask questions too about like Python in general. Like I've used Python at least for like one of my internships, I think, and at my school job.
Same here for my internship, at least. But if not, we would like to thank everyone for coming. And
Ellie, did you have a question?
So I was actually curious what your guys' internships were, because do you both work at the school, or is it outside of the school, or?
So for the job that I had at the school, I was like a technical assistant for the for one of the like observatories on like the Stewart Observatory campus.
Oh, cool.
But for that job in particular, Python was mostly used for like data analysis and like manipulating data. Like one of the libraries we used most of the time was like Python Pandas. So I think Python in general is used a lot for like data analysis and data sciencey type work.
Mm-hmm. Do you know Mr. Kingsley by any chance?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I had an internship last year, and hopefully next year when I'm a student at the school, kind of under his guidance. I had to 3D print a telescope, so yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, thank you.
I used Python at my American Express internship for last summer, but I guess depending on where you decide to intern and stuff like that, Python, I would say, is relatively new, or like just because a lot of legacy code is written in like Cobol or Java or C, or just stuff that's not very easily transferable, I guess. And so sometimes you'll have to work with code or with languages that you're not familiar with. But yeah, I was lucky to be able to do Python at my last internship.
Oh, okay, cool.
And I feel like more and more companies are starting to like figure out more ways to use Python as it's like getting, I think like the main issue with it is just that it's like not as efficient as Java and like the lower programming languages, but it's like they're finding different ways to like implement it in like systems that don't necessarily need like high optimization.
Right. It's definitely easier than Java.
Yeah.
I'm using Java right now, and it's crazy.
Yeah, and then it's like a lot easier to like recruit software engineers who want to code in Python.
Yeah.
Okay. some reason my screen is bugging out, so I can't stop sharing or anything like that. But thank you, Ellie, for coming to our workshop. If you're interested, you can join our Discord or keep up with us on Instagram as well. And we have a QR code on the screen for that if you are interested. But yeah, we hope to see you in the future then if you decide to come to the U of A.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming.